Ethan slouched in his seat as his family's car rumbled along the tree-lined road toward his new school, Westbrook High. He tried to ignore the nervous flutter in his stomach, focusing instead on the hope that this school would be different, that maybe, just maybe, he could escape the reputation that had followed him like a shadow at his last school. At his old school, he'd felt like he was invisible at best and a target at worst. His quiet, polite nature had made him an easy mark for bullies who never tired of finding reasons to torment him. Ethan remembered the bruises on his arms, the cruel words whispered in hallways, the laughter that trailed him wherever he went. He had felt trapped, desperate to escape a place where he seemed destined to be misunderstood. "Hey, champ, are you ready for the new school?" His dad, Mr. Carter, glanced back at him, eyes full of encouragement. His dad's belief in him was one of the few things that kept him grounded. "You've got this. It's a fresh start. No one knows anything about you here." Ethan forced a smile. His father's words were meant to reassure him, but they only reminded him of the weight of expectations. Starting fresh was a double-edged sword. It meant there was nothing to hold him back, but it also meant he'd have to prove himself all over again. Westbrook High wasn't exactly known for being welcoming to outsiders, but it was a far cry from the place he had left behind. Maybe here, he'd finally find a place to belong. As they pulled up to the school, Ethan's heart pounded. The towering brick building loomed above him, the front steps crowded with students chatting and laughing. Ethan took a deep breath and reminded himself of his father's words. He grabbed his backpack, took a final glance at his dad for reassurance, and stepped out of the car. No sooner had he set foot on the front steps than he felt the first ripple of attention. Eyes followed him, whispers spreading like wildfire among the students. Ethan did his best to ignore them, focusing on making it to his homeroom without incident. But even as he pushed through the crowd, he could feel the weight of their stares, the judgmental glances sizing him up. Inside the hallway, his journey to homeroom wasn't much better. A group of seniors chuckled as he walked by, muttering just loud enough for him to hear. "Look at the new kid, all shy and quiet. Bet he won't last a week here." Ethan's cheeks burned, but he kept his head down, gripping the straps of his backpack as though they were a lifeline. He'd learned long ago that standing up for himself only made things worse. If he could just keep a low profile, maybe he'd make it through the day without incident. As the first week dragged on, Ethan struggled to navigate the unfamiliar hallways, dodging groups of students who seemed to block every path. By the end of the day, he was drained, already dreading the thought of doing it all again tomorrow. That's when he noticed Madison, the queen bee of Westbrook High, watching him with an amused smirk from across the cafeteria. Madison was hard to miss, with her perfectly styled hair and confident stride. She moved through the school like she owned it, with her clique trailing behind her like loyal subjects. As he passed her table, she looked him up and down, sharing a knowing glance with her friends. Ethan's pulse quickened, a feeling of dread settling in his stomach. He had seen her type before, popular, untouchable, and intimidating. He ducked his head and quickened his pace, hoping to avoid any interaction. But as he walked past, he heard Madison's voice, smooth and laced with mock kindness. "Hey, new kid, wait up," she called out, loud enough for everyone around to hear. Ethan's steps faltered as he reluctantly turned to face her, feeling dozens of eyes on him. She smiled, all too sweetly. "You're new here, right? Must be hard fitting in." Ethan forced a nod, wary of her tone. "Yeah, it's different." "Well, don't worry. We've got a little tradition here at Westbrook High for new students like you," she said, her friends snickering softly around her. We have this award, most popular new student. To make people feel welcome." Ethan blinked in surprise, caught off guard by her words. Popular? Him? It seemed unlikely, but Madison's warm smile made him wonder if maybe she was genuinely trying to be friendly. "I don't know," he muttered, uncomfortable but flattered by the idea. "That sounds nice." Madison exchanged a sly glance with her friends, who struggled to stifle their laughter. "Well, we think you'd be perfect for it. All you have to do is come to the ceremony next week, and we'll see how it goes." Ethan's heart lifted, hope flickering in his chest. Maybe he'd misjudged her. Maybe this school wouldn't be so bad after all. After a lifetime of feeling invisible, the thought of being seen, even recognized, was more than he could resist. "Sure," he said, a small smile forming despite himself. "I'll be there." The following days were a whirlwind of mixed emotions for Ethan. Part of him was nervous, but a much bigger part was excited. For once, he felt like he might be part of something. The prospect of being accepted, of even becoming popular, was too tempting to ignore. At home, he prepared carefully, picking out his best clothes, practicing a simple thank you speech in front of the mirror. His mother noticed his enthusiasm and offered to iron his shirt for him, pleased to see him so invested in something. "You're going to do great, Ethan," she encouraged him, smiling warmly as she handed him his freshly ironed clothes. When the night of the ceremony arrived, Ethan took one last look in the mirror, straightening his shirt and trying to calm his nerves. He reminded himself that this was the beginning of something new, a chance to leave behind the loneliness and insecurities that had plagued him for so long. With a final deep breath, he stepped out of his house and headed for Westbrook High, unaware of the trap waiting for him. The gym was packed with students, all buzzing with excitement. Ethan felt his heart racing as he made his way to the front, scanning the crowd for any sign of Madison. He clutched his speech in his hand, fingers trembling slightly. He couldn't believe he was about to do this, but the thought of being accepted fueled his resolve. As he reached the stage, Madison greeted him with that same too sweet smile, her friends barely able to contain their laughter in the background. She handed him the microphone and motioned for him to start his speech. Ethan glanced out at the sea of faces, suddenly nervous but determined. He took a deep breath and began, "Thank you everyone for this honor. I never thought I'd..." Before he could finish, Madison's laughter rang out, echoing through the gym. "And let's give a big round of applause to our most gullible new student," she announced, her voice dripping with mockery. Laughter erupted from the crowd, and the realization of the setup hit Ethan like a punch to the stomach. His face burned as he looked out at the audience, many of whom were openly laughing, some even taking pictures. His carefully prepared speech slipped from his hand, fluttering to the ground as he struggled to keep his composure. Unable to bear the humiliation, he bolted off the stage and out of the gym, the sound of laughter following him like a haunting echo. The fleeting hope he'd felt for acceptance crumbled into dust, replaced by the bitter sting of betrayal. Ethan spent the next few days avoiding everyone, the shame of that night still raw. He couldn't shake the memory of Madison's mocking smile, the laughter, the feeling of utter humiliation. He started doubting himself again, wondering if he was destined to always be the outsider, the joke. Yet, amid the anger and hurt, a new resolve began to form. Ethan realized that he was done being the target, the easy mark. He wouldn't let Madison's cruelty define him, not anymore. He had to find a way to regain his dignity, to prove to himself that he was more than their shallow judgments. Little did he know, Fate had already set the wheels in motion for an encounter that would change everything. And it would all begin with a chance meeting between Madison and someone she never expected to cross paths with again, Ethan's father. Curious to see how karma comes full circle? Hit that like button, subscribe, and stay tuned as we watch Ethan's story unfold in ways Madison would never see coming. The days following the humiliating ceremony were some of the hardest of Ethan's life. His mind replayed the moment on a loop, the laughter, Madison's smug smile, the glint of satisfaction in her eyes as the crowd laughed at his expense. He felt foolish for having believed her, and the shame gnawed at him, filling him with doubts about ever fitting in at Westbrook High. But there was something else, too. Beneath the hurt was a quiet, simmering anger, an unfamiliar feeling that had begun to surface. Ethan had always been the nice guy, the one who let things slide, who brushed off cruelty in the hope of avoiding conflict. But this time felt different. Madison's prank hadn't just embarrassed him. It had shaken something deeper, a part of him that refused to stay silent. He wasn't sure how he'd move forward, but he knew one thing. He would never give Madison or her friends the satisfaction of seeing him hurt again. The thought gave him a strange sense of power, and soon enough, he would have a chance to prove it. The following week, Ethan accompanied his father, Mr. Carter, to a production studio in town. Ethan's dad was a producer, working on a wide range of projects from commercials to small film projects. Ethan sometimes joined him, helping with setup and getting a behind-the-scenes look at the industry. It was a welcome distraction, pulling his mind away from the school drama and giving him a glimpse into a world he respected. As he adjusted lighting equipment on set, Ethan overheard his dad discussing an upcoming casting. They were auditioning high school students for a new commercial, one that would air locally. Ethan listened absent-mindedly, grateful for anything to keep his mind off Madison and her clique. But then, as he set down a piece of equipment, he froze. Standing in the waiting area was none other than Madison herself, glancing at her phone and looking thoroughly self-assured. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected to see her here, and for a moment he considered ducking out of sight. Then he overheard his father's assistant rushing over to Mr. Carter. "Mr. Carter, there's a scheduling conflict with the director for the final shoot. They need you urgently on set C." Mr. Carter sighed, turning to Ethan. "Hey, son," he called, "I'm going to need you to sit in for me at these auditions. Just help with the evaluations. Make notes. You know the drill. I trust your judgment." Ethan's initial shock at his father's request was quickly replaced by a sense of opportunity. He nodded, trying to keep his voice steady. "Sure, Dad. I'll handle it." As the auditions began, Ethan settled into his father's chair, trying to look calm and professional. He glanced over the list of candidates and, sure enough, saw Madison's name a few slots down. His heart pounded at the thought of judging her, the very person who had humiliated him so mercilessly. When her turn came, Madison entered the audition room, her confidence radiating as she gave him a casual glance. But as she recognized Ethan sitting in the judge's chair, her face faltered. Her usual air of superiority wavered as she quickly masked her surprise, standing stiffly under his gaze. Ethan kept his expression neutral. "Go ahead, Madison," he said, gesturing for her to begin. She stammered for a second, but quickly composed herself, launching into her lines with practiced charm. But the initial shock hadn't fully faded, and her usual self-assurance seemed to crack under Ethan's watchful eyes. She stumbled over a line, her voice wavering, clearly unnerved. When she finished, There was an awkward silence. Ethan met her gaze, his expression calm but resolute. "Thank you, Madison. I'll give you some feedback now." Madison's face shifted from confidence to nervousness, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her features as she listened. "Your performance was okay," Ethan said, deliberately keeping his tone professional. "But you need to work on connecting with people genuinely. If you want others to feel something from your work, you need to bring empathy and respect, not just charm." Madison swallowed, her cheeks flushing. She tried to smile, but Ethan could see the discomfort in her eyes. "Thank you," she muttered, barely able to meet his gaze as she left the room. The following day, the story of Madison's shaky audition spread quickly through the halls of Westbrook High. Students who had once admired her began to question her behavior, her popularity taking a noticeable hit. A few even approached Ethan, offering apologies or words of encouragement, acknowledging the cruelty he had endured. Madison, for her part, couldn't ignore the effect Ethan's feedback had on her. It gnawed at her, the words echoing in her mind long after the audition ended. She realized painfully that she had always relied on superficial charm and power to get what she wanted, never stopping to think about how she treated others. The admiration she had taken for granted now felt hollow, and the friends who once flocked around her started to distance themselves, unwilling to support someone who had treated others with such disdain. A few days later, Madison found herself at a crossroads. She knew she couldn't go back to the way things were, but she wasn't sure how to move forward. Taking a deep breath, she approached Ethan during lunch, her once confident stride now hesitant. "Ethan," she began quietly, her voice lacking its usual bravado, "I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything." Ethan looked up, a mixture of surprise and caution in his eyes. Madison continued, her tone earnest. "I know I messed up. I treated you horribly and it wasn't fair. I guess I never realized how much my actions could hurt someone." There was a pause as Ethan considered her words. Finally, he nodded, his face softening. "Thank you for saying that, Madison. I think we all make mistakes. Maybe it's about what we learned from them." Madison gave him a small, grateful nod before walking away, feeling a strange sense of relief. For the first time, she felt as though she might actually be able to change. From that day on, Madison took small steps to rebuild her reputation, focusing on treating others with kindness rather than intimidation. She stayed out of the spotlight, no longer seeking validation from those around her. Though it was hard at first, she found unexpected peace in letting go of the need for control. Ethan, meanwhile, found himself feeling more confident, supported by friends who valued him for who he truly was. With the ordeal behind him, he was able to embrace his new life at Westbrook High with a fresh perspective, no longer defined by the opinions of others. Sometimes the hardest lessons come from facing our own mistakes. If you enjoyed this story of growth, karma, and redemption, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories about resilience, kindness, and second chances.